The Triplet Alpha Kings claimed the Virgin Omega's destiny, a bond that shocked the entire pack. A real-life story, written in third person, complete in one part. Part 1. The Girl Nobody Watched. The night of the Blood Moon ceremony, Serafina Lowe pressed her back against the stone wall outside the Great Hall and told herself she was not nervous. She was lying. Her hands were doing that thing they always did when she was nervous, fingers tapping against her thigh in a pattern that had no rhythm, no meaning, that just moved because staying still felt worse. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. She'd been keeping that rhythm since she was 7 years old, standing outside another hall, another closed door, waiting for someone to come back who never did. She stopped tapping. Through the thick oak doors of the great hall, she could hear the whole pack gathered, 300 wolves in their good clothes, talking in the low, excited hum that comes when people know something is about to happen but cannot agree on what. Tonight was the claiming ceremony. One night every 100 years, when the blood moon rose full and dark red, and the old bonds, the ones the founders had written about in texts most people called legend, were said to come alive again. Most of the pack treated it like a festival. Good food, good wine, a chance to dress up and see who else had grown up in the years between now and the last time they'd all been in the same room together. Serafina was not expecting to have a good time. She was Omega class, outer ring assignment, daughter of Reuben Lowe, who the official council files described as a disgraced beta, a label that had followed her name like a shadow her whole life. No special bloodline, no family name that opened doors. She'd gotten her ceremony invitation because every unmated wolf between 20 and 25 was required to attend. She was 22. She was unmated. So here she was, in her best dress, which was actually her friend Nadia's best dress, because Nadia had insisted and Serafina had run out of energy to argue about it. The dress was blue. It was nice. She would have preferred a corner. She pushed the door open and went inside. The hall smelled like pine resin and something older, something that sat at the back of your throat like a word you'd forgotten, a feeling you'd once had and couldn't place. Serafina had been in this hall twice before, for other ceremonies, and it had never smelled like that. She told herself it was the candles. They'd lit 200 of them along the walls, amber flamed, and the light they threw turned everything honey gold, warm in the way that old things are warm, with history and weight, and the sense that many people had stood in this light before you. She found an empty space near the back pillar and stood there. 300 wolves. She knew maybe 40 of them by name. She knew 4 of them well enough to wave at without it being strange. The Silver Moon pack had always been like that for her. A crowd she lived inside but never quite belonged to. Not hostile, just distant. The way a window keeps distance between you and the cold outside. Glass so clean you sometimes forget it's there, until you press your hand against it and feel how thin everything is between you and alone. She was pressing her hand against that glass right now, mentally, while pretending to study the stone carvings on the pillar beside her. Then the side doors opened. She felt it before she saw it. That's the only way she ever knew how to describe what happened next. Not a sound, not a sight, just a pressure, like the room had shifted its center of gravity. The Valdric brothers walked in, Caspian first, then Dorian. Then Emran, who was last the way he was always last, arriving like a man who had taken his time deciding whether he'd actually show up, and had concluded yes, but only barely. They were identical in the way that made people stop mid-sentence. The same dark hair, same jaw, same height, same broad-shouldered build, but nobody who watched them for more than a few minutes confused them. Caspian moved like someone who had already thought 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Dorian moved like a man who had no hurry, because the world, in his experience, would wait. Emran moved like a man who was quietly and permanently annoyed at the floor. The Valdric triplets were the Alpha Kings of the Silver Moon pack, had been since their father died 4 years ago, leaving the territory to 3 26-year-olds who held equal power and were constitutionally incapable of losing an argument. The pack revered them the way people revere figures they don't have to live near, worship at a comfortable distance, admiration that doesn't require intimacy. Serafina had seen them twice before. She had found them overwhelming both times, had gone home early both times, and had not thought about them more than she thought about the weather in countries she would never visit. She was thinking about them now, because all three of them had stopped walking. Not at the altar, not at the ceremonial positions they were supposed to take. They had stopped 15 feet inside the door, and they were, all three, in the same breath, at the same second, looking at her. Not at the room, not at the altar, at her. Serafina looked behind her, stone pillar. She looked to her left, an older wolf deeply committed to his wine glass, not looking up. She looked back at the three alpha kings, who had not moved. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Her fingers started tapping against her thigh. She stopped them. Part 2. What the air did. The bond scent hit the great hall like a door blown open in a winter storm. Serafina felt it first, because she was at the center of it. Later she would try to describe it to Nadia and run out of words twice before giving up. It was warmth without heat. It was the feeling of knowing the answer to something before the question has been asked. It was three distinct things arriving at the same moment. One cold and certain like deep winter stone, one burning and restless like the second before lightning, one patient and bottomless like water that had been running long before anyone thought to name it. She was feeling their bond threads, three of them, all landing at the same time, threading to her from the same three men, and she could feel each one settle into place, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known she'd been carrying. This was not how mate bonds were supposed to work. One wolf found one mate. That was the rule, the law, the thing everybody knew. Even in extraordinary cases, rare double bonds, contested pairings, 3 was not a number that existed in the current understanding of how the world operated. The room understood this before anyone said a word out loud. She watched the quiet move through the crowd like a wave, one section going still, then the next, until 300 people were standing with untouched glasses and mid-sentence conversations hanging in the air. The only sound was the candles, which did not care about any of this and kept burning with cheerful indifference. Elder Marin, the oldest of the 7 elders, white-haired and sharp in the manner of someone who has spent 70 years being certain about everything, dropped the ceremonial scroll she'd been holding. It hit the floor. It rolled. Nobody picked it up. Caspian moved first. One step, just one, and then stopped himself with the visible effort of a man who has practiced restraint and knows exactly how much it costs. His eyes, which were dark in the specific way of something that has been sure of itself for a long time, were fixed on Serafina. Emran had already crossed half the distance between the door and her pillar before Dorian caught his arm without looking. Emran didn't fight it. He stood with his jaw tight and his whole body leaning toward her like a compass needle pulled north. Dorian hadn't moved from his position. He stood very still in the way that Dorian was always still. But there was a difference to it now, deeper, the way water goes still before something rises from underneath it. Serafina took 3 steps backward. Her foot caught the base of the nearest ceremonial candelabra. 60 candles hit the floor in a cascading clatter that rang through the silent hall like the world's most inconvenient punctuation. She stood there and stared at them. 300 people were staring at her. 3 Alpha Kings were still looking at her with the same expression they'd had since they walked in. The elders were conferring in urgent whispers, and Serafina was calculating, in that helpless way the mind grabs for small logistics when large things become too much, whether she should apologize for the candles. What is this? Elder Marin. She had recovered her scroll. She had not recovered her composure. Serafina could see it in the rigid set of the old woman's shoulders, the controlled blankness of her face, the look of someone whose complete and lifelong understanding of how things work has just taken a direct hit. The elders pulled out their books. Actual books, the old kind, with covers that gave no indication of their contents, the kind that lived in archive rooms and got consulted on occasions nobody planned for. They paged through them in urgent consultation while the rest of the hall waited, and Serafina stood beside a pile of extinguished candles, trying to remember how to breathe normally. Elder Voss, the youngest of the 7, the only one whose face hadn't gone carefully blank, found his page and read aloud. A triple bond, 3 alphas to 1 omega, has not been recorded since the founding of this pack. The founding records document it once. In the first generation, it was considered, he stopped, cleared his throat. It was considered the highest possible bond. Sacred, in the old language of the founders. Sacred. Serafina was standing with one shoe on, because somewhere in the retreat from the candelabra, she'd stepped out of the other one. Sacred. She found her missing shoe under a decorative side table 2 feet to her left, picked it up, put it back on, and stood up straight. If the universe was going to do whatever this was to her in front of 300 witnesses, she was going to face it with both shoes on. Part 3. The Council's Answer. The emergency council session started before the ceremony was officially over, which Serafina thought was either impressively efficient or deeply ominous. Possibly both. She was not invited to attend. She was technically its primary subject. Nadia had found her by then, threading through the crowd with the purposeful intensity of someone on a mission, and had taken hold of Serafina's arm with the grip of a woman who feared her friend might otherwise float away from the situation entirely. "Say something," Nadia said. "I'm still determining whether this is actually happening. 3 Alpha Kings looked at you like you were the only fixed point in the room. In front of everyone, in front of the elders, I'd say it's happening. Triple bonds aren't real. Elder Voss just read it from a very old book. Old books are wrong all the time." Nadia gave her the look, the patient one, reserved for moments when Serafina was arguing with things that had already happened. "Sarah, you felt it." Serafina didn't answer that. She was feeling it right now. 3 separate threads of something humming underneath her ribs, like wires someone had strung without asking, each one a different frequency, a different temperature. She could close her eyes and tell them apart, cold and clear, like the air at high altitude, warm and pulling, like standing near a fire, deep and still, like the bottom of something with no visible floor. She didn't tell Nadia any of this. She said, "I need tea." The council's decision arrived by formal messenger 2 hours later, delivered at her door by a 17-year-old who looked like he had not signed up for this specific assignment and was coping poorly. He read from his paper, "The High Council, pending further examination of the bond event recorded this evening, recommends that Serafina Lowe, Omega Class, Outer Ring, submit to a full examination of origin within 3 days, to be followed, if the bond is deemed irregular or misaligned in origin, by the severance ritual, at the discretion of the presiding elders." He folded the paper. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "because none of this was his fault. He left faster than was strictly dignified." Nadia stared at the door after it closed. "Severance ritual," she said. "Flat. Yes. That's the one that, yes." Nadia sat down on the edge of the table and was quiet for a moment. The productive kind of quiet, where she was thinking instead of just being silent. Then, "What do the brothers say?" Serafina didn't know. She hadn't spoken to the brothers. After the ceremony, she had stood in the hall for 40 additional minutes, feeling the 3 bond threads hum and watching the crowd give her the particular radius of empty space people extend to things they cannot categorize. Then she had walked home. The answer arrived 40 minutes later, a second messenger, older than the first, visibly calmer. He delivered an envelope sealed with 3 different wax seals and departed without a word. The letter inside was short. Caspian's handwriting. She would learn later to recognize it as his. That precise architectural script formed the first line. "The severance ritual will not occur." Below that, in different handwriting, which she would later learn was Emran's, "Not a chance." Below that, no words, just Dorian's seal, pressed twice. She read it 3 times, set it on the table, picked it up and read it a 4th time. "Tea," she said. "I definitely, genuinely need tea." Part 4. 3 men, 1 room. They met properly for the first time. Actually met, face to face, without 300 witnesses and a dropped ceremonial scroll and 60 scattered candles between them. In the Pack Library, the morning after the ceremony. The library was Dorian's suggestion. Serafina would come to understand that most quiet, sensible ideas originated with Dorian. She arrived first, on purpose, because she needed 60 seconds alone in the room before they got there. She used those seconds to stand in the center of the floor and breathe and give herself a firm, no-nonsense talk about not letting this be larger than it was. The talk did not work. The bond threads were already responding the moment she walked in, because this was the building where Dorian spent most of his evenings, and his presence had soaked into the wood of the shelves, the worn reading chairs, the table surfaces, something that smelled like old ink and rain, and a third thing she had nothing in her experience to compare to. She sat at the table farthest from the door and put her hands flat on the surface. They arrived together, which was, she would learn, how they did most things. Caspian sat across from her. Straight posture, steady eyes, the bearing of a man who had spent the previous night thinking through every angle of a situation and arrived at a position he intended to hold. Emran sat to her left. He did not sit still, not loudly. He wasn't fidgeting or speaking, but he had that quality some people carry of being physically present at a slightly higher energy than everything around them, as if the room had to adjust to accommodate his being in it. Dorian sat to her right. He had a book on the table in front of him that he didn't open. He looked at her the way a person looks at a word in a language they've been quietly studying for years, which they've finally heard pronounced correctly in the wild. It was a lot of looking. Serafina was not accustomed to being looked at. "I don't know what to say to you," she said, because honesty was the tool she trusted most. "Then don't say anything yet," Dorian said. His voice was what she would have expected from his stillness. Low, even, unhurried, like someone who has time and knows it. "Just be here. We can work the rest out." "The council wants to sever it," she said. "The council," Imran said. His tone carried the rest of that sentence without bothering to finish it. "We are the council," Caspian said, "or we supersede it in matters of bond law." Elder Marin understands this. The emergency session was theater. Serafina looked at him. Theater for who? He held her gaze. For anyone watching who might think this situation can be undone, it cannot. A pause. Not for effect, but because Caspian measured what he said. "I want to be clear about that, since we're being honest. I have no interest in undoing it." Emran made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Neither do I. For the record, Dorian didn't say anything. He set his hand flat on the table between them, not reaching, not claiming, just placing it there. An offering of steadiness. Take it or leave it, no pressure either way." Serafina looked at his hand, then at three men who were watching her with more focused attention than she had received from any person in 22 years of living. "I have some questions," she said. "Ask them," Caspian said. "All of them," Emran added. "We're not going anywhere." So she asked them. It took 2 hours. They answered every single one, including the ones she suspected they found uncomfortable, which she appreciated more than she knew how to say out loud. Part 5. What Dorian Found. The archive room was in the oldest part of the pack hall, a basement level reached by a staircase that narrowed as it descended, that smelled of time in the specific way that only rooms full of very old paper can smell. Dorian had a key. He'd always had a key. He'd spent more evenings in this room than any other alpha in 3 generations, reading through records that most people filed under irrelevant. Most people were very wrong about what was irrelevant. He found the file on the 8th evening. Not because he'd stopped looking before that. He'd been looking every evening since the night of the ceremony. He found it on the 8th evening because it had been misfiled. The specific kind of misfiling that looks like clerical error, and the longer you look at it, looks less and less like an accident. The folder was thin, brown at the edges. The label on the tab read, Lowe, R. Disciplinary. Filed 14 years prior. Reuben Lowe, Serafina's father, the disgraced beta. Dorian sat down at the archive table under the single lamp and read the file. Then he read it again. Then he read the 3 original documents attached to it. Not copies, the originals, still carrying the seals of the filing officers, 2 of whom were elders who were no longer living, and one of whom was Elder Marin. He sat with the folder a long time, not because he was confused, because he understood exactly what he was holding, and he needed to be absolutely certain, before he brought this to his brothers and to Serafina, that he was reading it correctly and not letting hope do the work that evidence was supposed to do. He was reading it correctly. The facts, as Dorian pieced them together that evening across the main file and 4 cross-referenced records, were these. 14 years ago, Reuben Lowe had not disgraced himself. He had been silenced. He had worked as the pack's secondary archivist, a position that had been quietly made irrelevant in the years since, that most current pack members didn't know had ever existed. In that role, he had found something buried deep in the historical records that Elder Marin's family had spent 3 generations ensuring no one would ever find. 3 generations back, in the immediate aftermath of the pack's founding, a lineage document had been altered, a branch of the original Omega bloodline, the line descending directly from the founding Omega, the woman the founders wrote about, the woman the triple bond myth centered on, had been quietly rerouted, written out of the main records, reclassified as Outer Ring Beta, stripped of their lineage designation and, with it, any claim to the hereditary Omega sovereign title that the founding documents described. The motive was not complicated. The branch in question held a legitimate hereditary claim that threatened the authority Elder Marin's family had been consolidating for 3 generations, gradually absorbing the sovereign title's functions into the Elder Council, until the title itself was forgotten, filed as mythology, treated as legend. Reuben Lowe had found all of this. He had brought his findings to Elder Marin. After that meeting, he was never seen again. His daughter had been registered as an Outer Ring Omega with a disgraced father, which was the cleanest possible way to ensure no one would ever look at her closely enough to ask the right questions. Dorian came up out of the archive at midnight and stood in the empty hall for a while, holding the folder, the pack quiet around him in the particular way that only late night makes things quiet. He thought about the founding myth, the one that said the triple bond was a restoration, the universe's mechanism for correcting a course that had been pulled wrong. He had always read that as poetic language, the kind of thing you write when you want to give a historical event a sense of meaning. He held the folder against his chest and stood in the quiet hall and revised his reading. He went to find his brothers. Part 6. Serafina learns the truth. They told her together. That was the right call, though none of the 3 had discussed it. They had simply all arrived at her door at the same time the next morning, the way people do when they share a frequency they didn't choose. Dorian set the folder on her kitchen table. She read standing up, all the way through, every page, without speaking, and then she read the 3 attached original documents, and then she put the last page down and stood with both hands flat on the table and looked at a point in the middle distance for a while. Emran, who could not physically sit through silence when someone he cared about was processing pain, opened his mouth. "Sarah, my father found this," she said. Her voice was quiet and level, the specific level of someone who has spent many years in situations that required keeping their voice level. "He found it. He took it to Marin, and then he—" "Yes," Dorian said. She nodded. One nod, then another, the nod of someone filing a fact correctly in their mind so they can continue to function around it. "And the lineage record means that You are the last direct descendant of the founding Omega," Caspian said. He said it the way he said important things, directly, without softening, without dressing it up. "The triple bond is not an anomaly. It is what the founding records describe. It is what the founding records say should have happened, was always supposed to happen. The pack was meant to know your lineage," Dorian added. "Your family's designation was changed deliberately. The founding records that described the Omega sovereign title were allowed to become mythology while your family was reclassified and moved to the Outer Ring." Serafina looked at the folder on her kitchen table. She was very still for a moment. She thought about being 7, standing outside the hall, in the cold, tapping 1, 2, 3 against her leg, waiting for her father to come back from a meeting he had gone into and never come out of. She thought about growing up Outer Ring with the word disgraced, following her father's name, and, by extension, following her. She thought about borrowed dresses, and being scenery in rooms full of people who never looked at the door when she walked in. She thought about 123, 123. She hadn't tapped it since the ceremony. She noticed that now. "Okay," she said. Emran blinked. "Okay? I need a day to sit with all of this." She picked up the folder. "But yes. Okay. I understand what it means." She looked at the three of them. "And I know what we need to do next." Caspian had been watching her throughout with that careful, measuring attention of his. "What do you want to do?" She noticed the want. Not "what should we do?" or "what is the correct procedure?" "What do you want?" She appreciated that more than she knew how to say. "Bring it to the full council," she said. "Every record. In session. In front of everyone." A beat of silence. "All right," Caspian said. "Good," Emran said, and the tight thing he'd been holding in his shoulders since they walked in loosened by a visible degree. Dorian said nothing. He just looked at her steadily, then reached forward and set the folder neatly in front of her. Hers. Her decision. Her story to carry. She picked it up. Part 7. The Council Chamber. Full council sessions happened 6 times a year. Emergency full sessions, where the gallery was open to any pack member who wished to observe, were far rarer. They were called only for matters that affected the entire territory. Every wolf. No exceptions. Caspian called one the morning after Dorian's discovery. By the time the session opened, the gallery was packed. News had moved through the pack the way it always moved. Fast, imprecise, running ahead of facts and filling the gaps with speculation. The blood moon ceremony. The triple bond. The Alpha King's refusal of the severance ritual. The rumor, which had started in the outer ring and moved steadily inward, that something had been found in the archive. Something old. Something that changed the shape of what the pack thought it knew about itself. 300 wolves filled the gallery. 7 elders sat at the curved table below. The 3 Alpha Kings stood to the left of the table, and Serafina Lowe sat in the center chair. The chair that existed for exactly this kind of hearing, that hadn't been used in 40 years, that the gallery would have a clear sight line to from every angle. She was wearing her own clothes, not borrowed. Elder Marin opened the session. She was 70 years old, and she moved through this room the way she moved through every room, like she had been here before, like she would be here long after everyone else left, like the architecture recognized her. She was a woman who had survived difficult rooms for 5 decades by being the steadiest thing in them. She laid out her position clearly in the first 5 minutes. The bond event of the ceremony was extraordinary, yes, perhaps unprecedented. But the lineage of the Omega in question was established record, registered and filed, and established record could not be overturned by an unusual event, however dramatic. She used the word irregular 4 times. She used the word instability twice. She never once said Serafina's name. Dorian set the archive folder on the table. Elder Marin looked at it. "The original lineage documentation," Dorian said, "filed by the 3rd-generation archivist, including the alteration records. The original unaltered lineage document, the altered version, and the signatures of every individual present at the alteration." He let a pause sit. "One of those signatures belongs to someone at this table." The gallery went quiet, a different quiet from the ceremony. Not shock, something more complicated. The sound of 300 people revising what they thought they understood, reaching back through their memory of the low name and finding the shape of it changed. Elder Marin did not look at the folder. She looked at a point slightly above it, in the way of someone who has had a plan in place for a very long time and is determining, with great care, whether it still holds. "Those records," she said carefully, "were sealed, for reasons of historical sensitivity." "Yes," Caspian said, "your reasons. Historical record management is not equivalent to—" "You had a man removed," Emran said. He didn't raise his voice. He had the particular stillness of someone who understands that the quieter you speak, sometimes, the harder the words land. "He was your archivist. He found documentation that your family had falsified a lineage record 3 generations back to protect your position on this council. He came to you with that documentation." A pause, and then he was gone. And his daughter grew up outer ring with his disgrace listed beside her name, and no one looked at her closely enough to ask the right questions, and that is not an accident. The gallery had the specific held-breath quality of a room full of people who are listening hard and barely breathing. "We're looking now," Imran said. Elder Marin turned to look at Serafina. It was the first time she'd looked at her directly, in this room or any other room, since the ceremony. Serafina held the look without looking away. "You are very young," Elder Marin said. Her tone was not unkind. That was the thing about her. She was not a cruel woman. She was a practical one, which was sometimes more dangerous. "You have been given an extraordinary inheritance in a single evening. You have 3 powerful men very interested in your well-being. You have documents that, if verified, would reshape what this pack believes about its own history." She folded her hands on the table surface. "What I want to understand is whether you know what you're actually asking for here." The room was very quiet. Serafina sat straight in the center chair, hands in her lap, back even, not performing composure she didn't feel. She felt it, the real kind, the kind that doesn't need to move around to prove itself. The kind you grow when you have been the quietest person in every room for 22 years and have learned to carry weight without letting it show in your posture. She had 3 ways she could answer this. She could make a speech. She could defer to the brothers and let them carry the argument. Or she could say the true thing, the short thing, the plain thing, the thing that cut directly through the architecture of what Marin had built without bothering to scale any of its walls. She said the true thing. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I'm telling you what is. The records exist. The bond exists. My lineage was removed from the founding record to protect a council seat. My father found that out, and he disappeared." She paused. Not for effect, to be sure she had the words exactly right. "I'm not asking you to give me something. I'm asking you to account for what was taken." 11 words in that last sentence, maybe 12. The chamber was very quiet for a long time. Elder Voss, the youngest elder, the one who'd read from the founding text at the ceremony, the one whose face had been the only one not carefully blank that night, looked at Elder Marin, then looked away. Elder Marin unfolded her hands, set them flat on the table. It was an old gesture, the gesture of someone who has been in many rooms and knows precisely when a room has shifted direction past the point of recovery. She said nothing. Her silence was its own statement. Part 8. After the vote. The vote took 20 minutes. 7 elders. The 3 Alpha Kings, who held formal voting rights in full session under the pack's governing charter. 1 abstention. Elder Marin, who stood and left the chamber before the vote was formally called. The gallery watched her go. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said anything. Her leaving was her answer, dressed up as procedural neutrality. 9 votes cast. All 9 in agreement. The records were unsealed and entered into the permanent pack history. The low lineage was formally restored to its correct designation in the founding record. Elder Marin was removed from her council position pending a full investigation into the events surrounding Reuben Lowe's disappearance 14 years prior. In the gallery, 2 things happened in the moment the vote was read aloud. First, a sound moved through the room. Not speech, not applause, just a collective exhale. 300 people releasing breath they hadn't known they'd been holding. Then someone in the back of the gallery started clapping. Slow at first, then faster, and then it spread the way things spread in rooms full of people who have been waiting for permission to react, jumping from section to section until it filled the whole space, floor to ceiling, spilling into the hall outside. Serafina sat in the center chair. She looked at the table in front of her. She felt the 3 bond threads hum, one cold and certain, one warm and present, one patient as deep water. She took a breath in, let it out. Nadia found her in the corridor outside the chamber 30 minutes later, once the formal adjournment had thinned the crowd enough to move through. She looked at Serafina for a long moment, taking stock. "You sat in that chair," Nadia said, "and you said 11 words, and it was done. The records were done. I just pointed at them. You know what I mean." Serafina leaned back against the wall. Pack members were still moving past, some of them glancing at her with that recalibrated look, the expression of people revising a mental file, crossing out what they thought they knew and rewriting the entry. "Are you okay?" Nadia asked. Serafina thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet. I think I will be. I think I'm going to be more okay than I've ever been." She paused. "But I'm still standing on the bridge between the two things, the before and the after." Nadia nodded. She understood bridges. She had walked her own. At the end of the corridor, Dorian appeared. He stopped when he saw them, didn't walk toward her, didn't gesture, didn't interrupt, just stood there, present, available, in that specific way of his that said, "I'm here when you need me, and I will wait for however long that takes." Serafina looked at him across the corridor. He looked back at her. She pushed off the wall. "Bridge," Nadia said quietly. "Bridge," Serafina agreed, and she walked toward him. Part 9. The Bond Ceremony. She asked for it to be small, not from embarrassment, not from any lingering uncertainty about her place in this territory. The gallery applause had been real. The notes left at her outer ring house in the following days had been real. The shift in the way PAC members looked at her when she passed them in the common hall was real. The PAC's opinion of Serafina Lowe had undergone a significant revision, and while some of those notes were awkward in the way that apologies by omission tend to be awkward, the warmth in them was genuine. She asked for small, because this moment was hers. 4 people in a room was hers. 300 people and a dropped ceremonial scroll and 60 scattered candles was the PAC's story. This, the quiet one, the real one, the one she would carry in her body for the rest of her life, was not something she was willing to perform for an audience. The brothers agreed, without discussion. Of course they did. They held it in the library, Dorian's idea, the room that smelled like old ink and rain, and something she'd given up trying to name and had simply started thinking of as his. 1 lamp lit, 4 chairs arranged in a rough circle, close enough that it felt like a conversation and not a ceremony. The PAC record keeper, an older woman named Adela, who had served as the secondary archivist before that position was rendered invisible, and who had a very particular look on her face throughout the whole proceeding that suggested she understood precisely the historical weight of what she was witnessing, sat in the 4th chair with her documents and her pen. No special clothes, no formal altar, no candelabras anywhere near Serafina's feet, just the 4 of them and Adela and the sound of rain that had started outside the high windows sometime in the previous hour. Caspian went first. He spoke the bond oath in the old language, which she would learn he had spent 3 days practicing to pronounce correctly. He got it right. She knew because she felt it, the cold thread in her chest resonating with it, the certainty of it, the clean and architectural precision of a man who does not say things he doesn't mean and never has. He finished. He looked at her. She looked back at him. "I know," she said. Not the traditional response, the honest one. He nodded. Something in the line of his jaw changed, softened by a fraction, which for Caspian was a significant thing. Imran went next. He didn't use the old language. She would learn later that he had considered it, had spent an afternoon with the same text Caspian had studied, and had put it down, because the old language wasn't his language, and if this was the true moment, then it needed to be in his actual words. So he used his actual words. They were not formal. They were not polished. They were exactly what they were. A man who felt things at full volume saying precisely what he felt, at that volume, without apology for any of it. Serafina sat across from him and felt the warm thread in her chest ring like a bell that had been waiting to be struck, and thought, "Yes, that's what that is." He finished. His eyes were bright. "I hear you," she said. He exhaled. The first real, complete exhale she'd seen from him in 8 days. Dorian was last. He sat with his hands quiet on his knees. The lamp made warm light across the shelves behind him, and the rain had gotten louder on the windows, and the room smelled like everything it always smelled like. Paper, time, him. He was quiet for a moment, just looking at her. Then he said 3 words. Not the oath, not the old language, not a speech. 3 words. She would not repeat them later when Nadia asked, not because she'd forgotten, She had them exactly, the way you keep certain things exactly, but because they lived in the place where the third thread connected, the deep one, the patient one, and they were not hers to give away, she said, finally, which was also true. He smiled, slowly, the way still people smile when they finally do, the whole shape of their face reorganizing around it. Adela, the record keeper, who had been writing steadily this entire time with the focus of someone who understands that her handwriting is becoming history, looked up from her document. She looked at all four of them. She set her pen down. She picked it back up. "Bond witnessed," she said, in a voice that was working hard to remain professional. "Bond recorded. Ceremony complete." Outside, the rain was loud and steady. Inside, nobody moved for a while, which was exactly the right thing. Part 10, 3 months later. The pack's history scrolls were long. Adela unrolled the newest edition on the main library table 3 months after the ceremony, and it stretched 3 feet across the surface, smelling of fresh ink, carrying the slight weight of documents that have a lot packed into them. The new entries were comprehensive. The restoration of the Low lineage to its correct founding designation, the verification and historical authentication of the founding myth, 4 words in the margin of the original myth entry that the verification committee had debated and then agreed on: historical record, not allegory. The correction of the third-generation alteration, with the original document and altered document both preserved in full. The outcome of the Elder Marin investigation, which had concluded with findings that Adela had described to the pack as substantial, using the word in the specific way that means much more than I am going to detail right now. At the bottom, the newest entry of all, the triple bond, first recorded in the pack's history since the founding itself, with all 3 Alpha Kings named and all relevant cross-references annotated, and the restoration significance noted by the historical committee in 2 careful sentences. Adela looked across the unrolled parchment at Serafina. "I need a title for the notation beside your name," she said. "For the record, the library was the usual occupants. Dorian in his chair at the far end, with a book he was actually reading. Caspian by the window he favored when he was working through something. Emran on a chair he had turned backward, arms folded over the backrest, watching Serafina with the uncomplicated, full-presence attention that was simply how Emran looked at people he loved. "Title," Adela prompted gently. Serafina thought about it. She thought about outer ring addresses and her father's name followed by disgraced. She thought about borrowed dresses and 300 people in a room where nobody watched the door when she came in. She thought about her father, whose name was also in the new entries now, correctly listed, faithful archivist, man of the record, a person who had done the right thing and paid for it, whose name was now restored, alongside the findings that vindicated him. She thought about 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. She could not remember the last time she'd done it. She tried to remember, she couldn't find it. "Just my name," she said. Adela's pen paused. "Just your name. Serafina Low. That is the title." Adela wrote it, set her pen down, looked at the entry for a moment. Then she picked the pen back up and, in the notation field, wrote what the bond records confirmed, what the founding documents authenticated, what the 3 Alpha Kings had formally attested in full council session. Founding line. Restored. She crossed it to the founding myth entry, which now had its own new notation below it. 4 words, in Adela's careful hand, that had not been there 3 months ago. Not allegory, historical record. She rolled the scroll back up. From across the room, Emran was grinning, the big, unguarded one he kept for moments when he wasn't performing anything for anyone. Caspian had turned from the window. Dorian had set his book down. "Thank you," Serafina told Adela. Adela tilted her head. "Thank your father. He found it first. He just didn't live to see the record corrected." She said it gently, not unkindly, because it was true, and true things deserve to be said plainly. Serafina nodded. "Yeah, he had." She picked up the scroll, her copy, which Adela had prepared, and held it. The Silver Moon Pack's records were updated that afternoon. 312 wolves now lived in a territory whose history had become more honest than it had been in 3 generations. Most of them wouldn't notice right away. That's the honest thing about truth. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It just sits in the record, patient, waiting for the right person to come along and finally read it. Serafina Lowe had been waiting for 22 years. She was done waiting now. End. Approx 9,000 words. Third-person POV. Complete in one part.